What's good, guys? It's Ray J back with another video, and in this one I'm going to be talking about the one and only Tesla stock and what you should be looking after for the future. I'm also going to break down why tomorrow is going to be an absolutely massive day for the stock market as we have CPI coming out. We also have some bullish pieces of news coming up for Tesla. I'm going to break down what the data is telling us moving forward and what the technicals are suggesting about tomorrow. And before I break anything down about what's going on with CPI, what the market is thinking the Fed is going to do, and what's going on with all this data and news for the markets and Tesla, I do have to mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Make sure you take none of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire Tesla community as a whole. And finally, don't forget about the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below, and deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed 5 free stocks plus a $100 cash reward with other benefits. The offer ends in just a couple of weeks, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Tesla was up 2.22% for the day, and I told you guys if Tesla was to come to the downside, we have to watch for a break below this 244.5 support, followed by the 242 area. And if Tesla wants to turn very bullish, they had to break above 250 and hold it to get an even bigger breakout. We ended up just being stuck in this range as time went on because 250 resistance is quite strong. But I didn't give you guys a very, objective or very confident prediction because I didn't truly know how the data would play out. And that's why I was open to both possibilities, and I told you guys to watch for confirmation based off what we see in these levels. Now, a lot of people are starting to not be too happy about me not always giving predictions. Honestly, guys, I do give predictions the large majority of the time, but sometimes I can't really do it because I don't know what's going to happen with all the data coming out. I don't know what's going to happen with CPI. I don't know for sure. I don't know what's going to happen with PPI. I don't know what's going to happen because of OPEX expirations, at least exactly. I don't know what Jerome Powell is truly going to do. I'm just not truly a genie, and me just trying to take guesses just doesn't make sense. But I can tell you what's more likely and what charts are suggesting and what is more likely to happen given possibilities and different contingencies from that data. So this is all going to make a lot of sense in just a couple of minutes. I will talk about all of this in more detail, but let's first talk about the data, the news, and everything going on with Tesla. Now, to start us off, let me just mention that we have a lot of puts expiring for the week. We have over 3.5 plus million puts expiring on Friday, with just over 1.7 million or 1.8 million calls expiring for SPY for Friday. So the majority of positions are in favor of the puts. A lot of people are shorting the market again. This does not include every single position, but just SPY specifically. And typically when this happens, we know what the market makers like to do. Now, even though you would argue that the technicals look bullish, things are looking strong, we should see the market pump, you cannot know for sure until we get the data. The data is going to be our confirmation about whether or not SPY is going all the way up to 442 or 450, or if this thing gets a rug pull. And it's very important to be open-minded and objective and unbiased when looking at the market from this lens. And that's what I want to do on this channel. That's what I want to do for today. Now, what happened today? Why did the market start pumping like this? Well, to start us off, basically, I warned you guys that we had some big data coming out. It wasn't like massive data, but it was somewhat significant. Basically, it was coming out at about 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern time. I warned you guys yesterday about this, and it did come out. So what happened? What was this data that came out today? It was basically right over here. The Consumer Inflationary Expectations Report for May came out at 4.1%, basically 0.1% lower than what the forecast was according to this. What this tells us is consumers are expecting inflation to cool off a bit relative to before and not be as high as what we were expecting them to think beforehand. The market liked this, the market responded positively, and the market's now expecting us to get a decent CPI because it believes the Fed is about to pause. Now, I don't know for sure if that's going to happen, which is why we have to wait for confirmation, but for now, the market is ripping and the market's very excited. Now, what's going on with tomorrow? And what happened after this data came out first? Basically, the market traded sideways, formed this inverse head and shoulder, and then started uptrending a little bit after the data came out, maybe about 25 minutes after, or like 20 minutes after, maybe started uptrending right here, specifically at about, it was like 11, 15 minutes after the data came out, the market started uptrending. Then we started pushing and pushing and pushing. Then the market started ripping near the very, very end of the day because the market's excited about CPI. The market's very optimistic. Now, could the market be right? Yes. Could the market be wrong? That's also a possibility. That's why you have to be open-minded. CPI comes out tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. 1 hour before the market opens, CPI is coming out. We are expecting, the forecast is at 4.3% for CPI alone. For core, it's 5.4%. If it's hot, if core is at 5.5 or 5.5% or higher, like 5.6% or higher than that, the market's going to get a rug pull. If CPI is higher than 4.4%, 4.5%, 5%, something crazy high like that, the market's going to get a rug pulled. So you have to be ready for that. But hypothetically, if CPI comes in as expected at where these forecasts happen to be, or even lower than expected, the stock market is going to rip. I want to warn you about this. You have to be prepared for this, and you have to be ready. Now, the reason why I mentioned earlier that I secured most of my profits, not everything, because I did risk some of my positions for later on because I'm willing to take the risk, but it is risky. And that's why, a lot of investors like to hedge during times like these and manage risks. But that's the thing. It's a small position for me, and I'm willing to take the risk. And I am well aware of what the risk is. I know it's going to be tricky. I know this is going to be contentious. I know it's very important that we look at this from an unbiased standpoint. So make sure you're ready and you are ready for CPI. Let's hope we get a decent number for the livelihoods of everyday Americans. And let's hope things come out as we want them to come. Now, as far as the data goes, the market's expecting the Fed to pause with a 74.6% likelihood relative to 25.4% being the probability of them raising the rates even more. There's been some talk about the Fed potentially skipping excuse me, sorry guys, the Fed skipping on the rate hikes. That is not a guarantee. And here's the reason why. We are not going to know if the Fed is going to skip until July, right? The Fed could say that, oh, we're open to more rate hikes. We could do it again in the future. We are not going to know until July actually comes. And if anything, the headlines are just going to talk about the pause. The pause is here. And I think the market is going to interpret this in a very bullish way, in my honest opinion. The odds greatly favor that. Now, why is that? Because some people are thinking that we could get a different reaction from a skip or a pause. Like I said before, in June, we don't know if it's going to be a skip or a pause if they do pause, because we have to wait for July to confirm that. For that reason, when the headlines talk about some kind of pause in June, the market's going to get a very, very positive reaction, in my opinion, because we don't know, there's uncertainty about July, but there's certainty about June. What that means is they're either going to pause or raise the rate even more. If they raise it more, the stock market is going to get a pullback. It's going to get a correction. It's not going to expect it. If they pause, the market, it doesn't matter if it's going to be a skip or pause because we won't know that. It's just going to be interpreted as a pause. The market's going to rip. The market's going to rally. Now, anyways, for some more data, just to be very blunt, we have Adobe reporting earnings for Thursday. Nothing else is too significant that I'm seeing. For Tesla, I mentioned this in the morning. Tesla's unveiled a new Gigafactory laboratory concept. This is once again very awesome for them because they are putting lots of work into producing their cars in very fast periods of time. But it requires research, experimentation, and all these different things. They also have to work on improving their products alone. So which types of technologies they're using, what types of minerals, and etc. So it's all going to be very important for them moving forward. Let me also add that Tesla's I don't know if it's pronounced NACS or NACS connector. It basically gained a lot of support from a bunch of other companies, and this is some more very bullish news. First, and this is what I told you yesterday. Remember when I said this? Ford and GM hopped in. They adopted Tesla's connector. They're jumping in the supercharger network space. And then I told you guys that we might see other companies now starting to do the same thing because there's a lot of talk about like Chrysler potentially joining in and many other companies. Now we're starting to see not just the specific car companies, but other companies as well joining in. We have like ChargePoint, EVgo, Wallbox, the list goes on. More companies are excited. They're pouncing on the opportunity. And this is just going to benefit Tesla more as more and more people join their supercharger network. Once again, bullish news moving forward. It is big news, but it's not everything. CPI is going to matter a lot more. The market is ending at almost a 14-month high. We're getting closer and closer. The market is very, very bullish, but technicals alone are not everything. There's very positive sentiment ever since the headlines were saying that we're in a new bull market. But like I said before, let's see if the data confirms this. If the data at least helps it out, that could help it too. Some good news that came out is the Model 3, Model Y And basically, all the models have their listings just decreasing, which shows that there's higher demand for Teslas and more people are starting to buy them up. I still hope that this trend continues, especially as we're getting closer to like the 4th of July and big holidays like that. So it's very awesome. Tesla has good volume, 150 million in volume, looking very, very strong right now. Lots of buying pressure. Short volume on Tesla has dropped relative to price. I'm sorry, it's still relatively high. But what's good about this is, check this out. Let me go down here. Look at the short interest. Have you guys noticed that when Tesla's short interest starts to spike up like crazy, typically, not always, but typically, Tesla starts pumping. And the reason for that is because shorts tend to get squeezed and they tend to bet against Tesla. And a lot of the time, when they try to do it, it does not work in their favor because Tesla has some new news that comes out, something comes out, and the market makers could work against many of these individuals, not just the market makers, but other institutions too. We could also start to see lots of short covering as a result of that, which leads to this domino effect of Tesla continuing to pump, thanks to more shorting and other factors such as higher volume and more buying pressure. If anything, Tesla's getting all the right factors for a short squeeze, but it needs the final cherry on top. It needs more and more things to help it short squeeze even harder, and that's why we're going to be looking at the data very carefully. Let me add, well, a lot of this data doesn't matter, guys, because we're just going to react to CPI. So typically we're okay on Tuesdays. We're growing like 51% of the time. It just doesn't matter. None of this matters that much. Tesla is outperforming the market with a high price price ratio. But once again, historical data just does not matter as much. It all depends on CPI. So now let's break down this very carefully. Now on this chart, I have a lot of these like smaller levels. These are like the more like scalp levels, day trading levels, but the major resistance on SPY, now that it is starting to break and it held above 432, the major resistance that comes next is going to be 440. That's like the very strong resistance, right? And what do I mean by that? In case you're new, notice how when SPY broke above, like, for example, 430, we did not get stopped as much around 431 as we did at 432. So like maybe that's not the best example. Maybe like right here you could see 427.5 was not very strong resistance that stopped us compared to like 430, right? I'm sure you guys remember that when SPY bounced off 426. So some resistance levels are like minor, other ones are much tougher. And what I'm trying to tell you guys is the next really tough resistance on SPY, if this thing does rip to the upside off a good CPI, is going to be all the way up to 440 to 442, basically. That's going to be the next resistance zone that's tough if this thing continues to rip up. So we have lots of room for upside. And if we break 442, it's going to fly to 450. It's going to fly really hard if we get a good CPI and the Fed pauses. Now, if the opposite happens, something completely different could happen, but I want to break down this in a very unbiased manner. So if we get a hot CPI and the Fed does not pause, hypothetically, the market's going to get this big like rug pull. So here are the levels to look out for on SPY. On SPY, we have some support at now 434, not really major compared to like 432 now. That's going to act as stronger support. If that breaks, the next very strong support is now going to be closer to like 430 because we have the 50 EMA there. That's also a psychological level. If that fails, there's 429, 428.5, 427.5, and then for the 426 zone. All right, watch those as support zones. If we get a hot CPI and the Fed basically not pausing, they continue to raise rates. These are going to be the minor levels. If anything, if it's a very bad reaction, SPY is going to make its way down to 420, if not the 410s. Okay, so you got to be ready for that. But if, once again, like I said, if we get a very positive reaction, the minor levels are going to be at like 435, 436.25, 436.64, 436.64, 438, and then 440. 440 being the stronger resistance. Break 440, we have more resistance all the way up in the 440s, of course, but the next really strong resistance is going to be 450. And we could go all the way up to 450 if we get a very, very good outcome. If the Fed does truly pause, I'm still, once again, in the middle. I know technicals look really bullish because the daily on SPY, for example, looks really, really bullish for now. There's no confirmation of this thing breaking. The only thing you could say is there is a bearish divergence technically present, looking at the RSI and also on the MACD. But here's the thing about that. You cannot objectively or confidently say that because there's no confirmation of this playing out. It could just keep pumping it and then it invalidates the bearish divergence that's developing. So do not worry about that for now until we get confirmation from the data and the technicals. For now, there's no technical rejection. The market is still ripping. The weekly, look at the weekly. MACD is very strong. There's no confirmation of this thing crashing. You could argue that, oh, there's this bearish divergence. Well, actually, it's not on the weekly, it was on the daily, but it just doesn't matter because there's no confirmation of it playing out. And the technicals still look bullish. So we just have to wait and see what happens with the data. The monthly also looks very bullish from a technical standpoint. Let me just note that technicals are not everything. That's why you have to look at the data. But if you're just looking at technicals, the odds are favoring more upside. Not a guarantee, though. We just need confirmation from CPI and all these other things. We're about to get a bullish cross on the PPO, so it's all looking stronger. But once again, even though the technicals suggest more upside, it's not a guarantee until CPI comes out. So make sure you watch the levels I mentioned and get ready for a big move. For Tesla, if we turn really bullish after CPI comes out, well, it's going to depend heavily on these levels. So just like right off the bat, I mentioned to you guys that we had these levels beforehand. For Tesla to turn bullish, we need to break and hold above this $250 level of resistance. So I'm going to just move this a little bit more this way. If it manages to break this resistance around 250, we could see Tesla fly to the minor levels of 254, 257, 260, 262, and then potentially 266 to 270. If Tesla, breaks down and we don't really get a bullish outcome, watch support at 247.5, 245.95, 244.5, 242.5, 240, 236, then potentially these lower levels like 234 and etc. I think there's going to be a big move. So these are just like the minor levels. If CPI is very bad and the market gets a rug pull, it depends on how bad it is. We could see Tesla make its way down to the 230s, if not even closer to 220, the 220 zone, if it's very, very bad. If it's a good CPI, I'm expecting a big move. And I think that this will fuel the narrative of the Fed pausing if it's a very good CPI. If it's a lot lower than expected, we could see Tesla make its way closer into the mid to high 250s very quickly, then potentially 270 to 276 later on if the Fed pauses, or even higher than that. NEO, just briefly on NEO, it had the inverse head and shoulder formation back here, which I called out before, and you could see this accumulation is playing out, it's still uptrending. I called NEO out before. I told you the technicals look good, and NEO was holding up. I wasn't sure if this would last, but it's still continuing to pump. And we do have this accumulation phase, so we have this gap. If we're bullish after CPI, we're going to be watching 8.61 to potentially $9 to 9.25. For bearish after CPI, watch 8.2, $8, 7.85, then potentially 7.5. For Ford, okay, Netflix, just real quick. For Netflix, if we're bullish, watch 4.25, then potentially 430. It could break much higher than that afterwards, depending on CPI. For bearish, watch 420, then potentially 416. And if that fails us, there's some balance closer to this 410 area. Technicals are looking a little bit more bullish, but I would need some more confirmation before making any decisions. And if it breaks 430, it's going to make its way closer to this 436 to 440 level. I just remember that from my head. Ford is going to make its way up to 14.03. And if it breaks above the 14 area, could push to about 14 points. The last level I remember was 14.25, around there. If it's bearish, it's going to come all the way down to about 13.64, 13.5, then potentially get closer to 14.25, then 13.25, then potentially 12.89. Basically come down. I'm really in the middle with Ford. I mean, you could argue there's the head and shoulders, but we just need confirmation on the data first. For the triple Q, if we're bullish, we're going to be watching 361, 363, 365, 366, 0.01, then potentially 368, and then 370 as minor resistances. The next major resistance is going to be closer to the 370 area. The next major one, if it comes down, watch support around 360 is going to act as one support. Then we have 359 right here, this 359 range. If that breaks down, then we have 357.5, 355.43, which is where the 50 is, very close to 355.5, 354, 352.5, and then 350 to 349, and then even lower than that. Technicals look strong in the QQQ. It's still holding up nicely, but we need confirmation from CPI. I'm prepared for a big move nonetheless. The HYG is kind of red because of this divergence that formed. Basically, it's a little red because we saw some selling near the very end. Like right here, it sold off, then just traded sideways. The bonds traders are not super confident just yet, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. Nasdaq is still very bullish looking from a technical standpoint. If we get a good CPI, it could make its way up above 13,500. If it fails to do so, it could get a big rejection and make its way down to about 13,000 200, which is where the 50 EMA is on the hourly time frame. So basically, I'm open-minded to either direction. We need CPI to tell us, and we're going to find out from there. SPX, if we're super bullish after CPI, we're going to be watching this 43.60 area, then potentially 43.80. If we're really bullish and the Fed pauses too, 44.20 is going to be major resistance. Break that, then 4,500 is going to come. If the Fed pauses, if you include that factor. If it breaks down, watch supports at 4,300, 42.80, and potentially 42.50 or even lower levels like that, because on the hourly we have 4,200 and even lower levels if we get a hot CPI. Make sure you're ready for that. I'm trying to be as objective and honest as possible. I don't really know exactly how it's going to play out. You could argue there's a bearish divergence, but like I said before, there's no confirmation of it playing out. So you can't say, oh, it means the market's going to take. There's no confirmation. Don't make that claim. Watch the data first. Watch for confirmation. The VIX is very manipulated. It's up 8.53%, but there is this big gap down below. So I'm just going to wait on that for the time being. The dollar is pretty flat, not really telling us anything. It's still at 103.64. SQQQ is pretty flat. It's just down a tiny bit. Once again, there's not much to say about it. Coinbase has this imbalance close to about 58. If we're bullish, it could make its way up to break above the 50 and then the 200 as resistance, then potentially make its way up all the way there if we get a very bullish CPI and this thing bounces. If it fails to bounce, it's going to come all the way down to where this gap was, to 45 if it ends up getting a big rejection. We just have to wait and see on the data first. If Apple's bullish, it's going to break 185 plus. If it's bearish, it's going to come down to about 182.5, then potentially 181.25, then potentially 180 after that, 178 and beyond. So be ready for Apple. This is going to be a big one. The odds do favor it making its way up to 185, but we have to wait for the data. The Fed pause could even launch it even more, but we just have to wait and see. We just don't know yet. If Nvidia is bullish, it's going to break 400, then potentially 405, 411, 415, then 420. Those are the levels I remember just from the back of my head. 405, you can see there right there. Then we have 420 after that. If Nvidia, and the thing is, Nvidia has this potential inverse head and shoulders, so there's a good chance it might make its way up, but not a guarantee because technicals are not everything. If Nvidia comes down, if you want to turn into a bear, you need confirmation from the hourly time frame. Watch the 50 EMA. This has been holding the video for the past 3 days. The 50 EMA, if that breaks, if it breaks 388, this is going to be maybe closer to 390 by the time we open tomorrow if it holds these levels depending on CPI. If it breaks that support, we're going to be watching 385, potentially 380, then 377, then 375 as support. For Google, if we're bullish on Google's going to pump all the way up to about 127 to 130. This is zone all the way up here. There's a potential accumulation phase. We have this imbalance over here. If Google fails to do so, if it comes down, watch support at 123.73 and potentially 123.66. If that fails us, you're going to be watching 122. If that fails, there's 120.75, 120, then 119 as support. Where am I leaning towards? It looks more bullish from a technical standpoint, but we have to look at the data first. 10-year treasury yield is up right now. There's not much happening. Typically, this would slow the market down, but there's just no confirmation of anything. It's just moving with the market as of right now. This was because of the debt ceiling. So we're just going to wait and see how CPI affects that in the FOMC meeting. Amazon got to this imbalance level or very close to 127. It could reach this during maybe the pre-market tomorrow. I don't know for sure. If we're bullish on Amazon, it's going to pump closer to 130. If we get a very good CPI and the Fed pause, it could keep pumping. There is a potential bearish divergence, or actually it's not confirmed just yet. There is a possibility it's going to form, but once again, even if it forms, there's no confirmation of Amazon tanking because of it. If Amazon comes down because of a hot CPI, watch 124.5 as support. If that fails us, 122.22, 120.63, then potentially watch 119.17. So very similar numbers to Google. I find that very fascinating. Could be a coincidence, who knows? But anyways, Amazon looking pretty decent so far, pretty good setup, but we need to wait for the numbers for confirmation. Last but not least, we have Meta. If Meta is bullish after CPI, it's going to pump to about 275, then potentially what is this? Actually, we have, let me double check this. 274.25, then 275, then we have 276.5. Break that, then we're going to be watching this thing get closer to 280. If Meta does not get a bullish reaction after CPI and CPI is too hot and we just have bad data, this thing is going to come down to 270 as support, 269 is going to be major support, 267, 263.5, 261, and then after that comes 258, then potentially 255. So watch those support and resistance levels. I wish I was a fortune teller and I could tell you what's going to happen. I just don't know what's going to happen. So I'm always going to be prepared, and I'll be back during the pre-market tomorrow to let you guys know how it goes. All right, guys. So for all the Tesla fans out there, Tesla looks strong from a technical standpoint, but I don't solely trade on technicals. I also look at like macros, and I also look at what data tells us. Good CPI is going to launch Tesla up. A Fed pause will launch Tesla up even harder. I made a video about this over the weekend. It could launch Tesla very hard. If not, if Tesla fails to get the good response because of the market, and the market just does not like the CPI report, if it's too hot, Tesla has all these minor support levels, and major support is going to be closer to 242. Then it's going to potentially come down to the gap area around the mid 230s, and even lower than that if its CPI is very bad. It really depends on the extent of how bad it is. So just as a final reminder, all right, CPI comes out 1 hour before the market opens. Make sure you're ready for this. Make sure you do what you have to do. Make sure you are prepared for this. Expect a massive move. This is one of the most important CPIs of the year because it's likely going to play a big role in whether or not the Fed is about to pause during this meeting. Please be ready. Thank you all so much for listening. Am I saying the Fed will pause? No, I'm not guaranteeing anything. I'm not saying CPI will be high or low. I simply do not know, and I'm prepared for anything. That's why you have to watch these levels and get ready for tomorrow. 1 hour before the market opens, CPI is coming out. Thank you for listening. Tesla to the moon alongside the whole market, as the long term is still incredibly bright. I also have some merch for you guys if you want to buy anything. It's up to you. I don't really expect anything. It's just your choice. If you want to buy like a tank top, a hoodie, or anything like that, it's just your choice. If not, completely fine with me. Thank you for listening, guys. Have a good one. Tesla in the market to the moon, and peace out.